Good afternoon. I'm Shelly Williams, and this is the Move to Amend Making Sense weekly live stream where we talk about the news of the week and how it connects to corporate rule. Move to Amend, if you're new to who we are and what we're doing, we're a national grassroots campaign. We just 11 years old, formed before the Citizens United ruling came down because by people who already knew that corporate constitutional rights were a huge problem and saw it as an opportunity to build a campaign to abolish all corporate constitutional rights and the doctrine of money as speech. And so that's the 28th Amendment that we are trying to build a movement for. And it's the We the People Amendment in the House of Representatives with 74 co-sponsors. And we believe that in order for something this systemic to happen, we need a mass movement of people. And in order to have a mass movement of people, we believe in anti-oppression and solidarity organizing. And that's basically the gist of what we're doing. But we also just love democracy in general, and we're really excited to today kind of have a more international perspective. So I'm going to introduce, well, if you want to go, Greg first, and then Naty.
Greg Coleridge here, Outreach Director, and I'm not the one who is international, unless you think Ohio is not within the United States, and sometimes some people do think, given our politics, culture, but anyway, I'm from Northeast Ohio along the great North Coast, Lake Erie. Good to be here on this horrific Halloween edition of Making Sense.
Very spooky. We have our super spooky guest, Natalie, from Santiago, Chile. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Shelly and Greg.
Awesome.
Yeah, down here in Santiago.
She's the co-host of the Superstructure podcast, which you should check out. We just had a new episode drop.
We did. We talked about a lot of different stuff. If you're into MMT and Hegel rants. No.
Hi, Roberto. I believe I left you a voicemail the other day that you were getting your T-shirt sent on the way. So hope you got that by now. Welcome to our live stream.
Well, hopefully at some point we can put in the chat the link to your podcast.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Cool. Yeah, we're
or
on Twitter.
You have that. Oh, hi, Linda from North Carolina.
She is moving.
Oh.
Or has moved.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, hello from North Carolina then.
She's going to be doing some Democratic damage in North Carolina. So looking forward to her creating quite a bit of mischief. So, and Millie is with us. Greetings.
Hi, Millie.
Well, I think what we want to cover today in this last gathering before the elections, who knows what this program will be following the elections, are a couple of issues that we have run across in the news having to do with, the Chilean elections. And very exciting. So Natalie's going to introduce that and maybe provide a little context with there's some ferment in the air, some revolutionary ferment with not just what's going on in Chile, but elsewhere in Central and South America. We can have a little discussion about that. Some reports and issues around refugees coming to the U.S. and how individuals, refugees trying to come to the U.S. have been treated just horrifically. That's been an ongoing, a new report out about the reckless and abuse of refugees coming to this country. I want to talk about NPR and their underwriting by corporate criminals and the impact that has on telling the news independently and objectively, and how that connects to independence across the board of organizations trying to be on the cutting edge. The murder of George Wallace in Walmart.
Walter Wallace. Sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, Walter Wallace. George is on my mind. And then what the latest is with the pandemic relief and the criminality, if you will, on that, in the lack of action by Congress, just inexcusable, and the impact that's having on some people, but to the problem of others. And then finally, kind of ended up by talking about, since it is the election season, is it not, the incredible amount of money, who it's going to, and to what extent that's going to sort of change things when it comes to corporate rule. There's some just unbelievable numbers and amounts of cash being thrown around, and who that cash is backing, and what people who are throwing around that cash expect in return. Well, something that we need to keep in mind as we go forward. And then we'll finish it off with some positive things that we have run into this week, and some pronouncements, and leave it at that. So.
All right. So, new constitution that we have a really difficult time imagining here in the U.S. Is happening. It looks like it's going to happen in Chile. What was it? A 78%.
Yeah, they killed it. Yeah. I believe it was, yeah, I don't know the total, but it was like all along, like 78, 80, like, yeah, they just killed it. There was no, which I thought would happen beforehand. You know, there was no sense like in the street that it was even like, even if you had money to spend for the Rechazo campaign to reject the Constitution, like there wasn't purchase like in the streets to like be promoting that, if that makes sense. Whereas like everywhere you saw like on windows, apruebo, like I approve for the new constitutional convention. No mixta. No mixta means like there's no current sitting deputies that will be in the convention.
Mm-hmm.
They will be all voted, like all 155 will be voted in, I think April next year.
Okay.
And what was wrong with the old one?
What was wrong with the old one? Well, the old one was originally from 1980. It had been sort of deliberated on by like a backroom committee since the 73 coup. I think it was called like Comisión Ortuzar, you know, kind of masterminded by Jaime Guzman, this like far right law professor, hyper Catholic. And yeah, it was extremely neoliberal. Really, they put it in, the idea was to be able to transition down the road to like a nuts and bolts democracy, basically, where even if they weren't still a dictatorship, they would still be able to keep their regime in place and then have a better image, if that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, there's like huge limits. Like for one thing, democratically, it makes it really hard, the structure, to pass any new legislation, because you had for a long time something called the binomial system, which was like, it's really confusing, but basically it made it so it was tilted to the right always. And so it was really hard to change anything. And then also just things like you're obligated to not have state interference in certain areas, like things are obliged to be privatized, like the state can't do any commerce or anything like that. It's kind of hard to explain. Just like an extraordinarily neoliberal constitution. I mean, I know it's charted some, and like I don't know if there's like some historiographical debate, but like in Democracy in Chains with Nancy McLean, like looking at James Buchanan coming in from like the Virginia George Mason School working on that constitution. And there's been some amendments like during democracy, but it's still very undemocratic. There's almost nothing you can do. Everything's hyper privatized. Like any political reform momentum just like dies.
And when did that constitution go into effect? That previous one?
That's a good question, because I know it was written in 80, but I'm not sure if there was like a slight delay, or because they were still in a dictatorship, right, till 88, 90, till the 88 plebiscite and then the change of power. But they weren't really concerned with using the Constitution during the dictatorship because they still had power. Like they didn't really need it. So it was like always intention to be like the post-democracy, sorry, both, but yeah, post-dictatorship constitution. And especially in the early years, like there was a big change in 2005, like with Lagos on the center left, also in 2015, but not nearly enough. And excuse me. And But like in the 90s, you still had like Pinochet was senator for life. You had all these like appointed senators who were always really weighted to the right. So it was just like, I think what they say is like nuts and bolts, right? Like it was put to like keep things in a certain state.
Right. So just for viewers who may not know, so this, sort of the history was 1973. This Allende is overthrown, who had been previously popularly elected by the people, socialist. The outsiders, corporatists, U.S. didn't particularly like the guy. They organize a coup and overthrow him and put in this dictator. And with him was a new constitution, or just they ignored the old constitution?
Yeah, I mean, the military junta took power, so I actually need to do more research on that. But I think the constitution before that was like from early 20th century. But yeah, Chile had always been a pretty like centrist, like republic type country. Like they'd had some moments with like certainly like in the 20s there was like a dictatorship, and there were things in the 40s where like the Communist Party was made illegal, but it'd always been kind of a center left, center right alternating country, kind of like it is now. So it was a shock to the system in a lot of ways, and that dictatorship lasted a lot longer than others in the region. Like you have in Argentina also a huge 70s dictatorship, but that one, when they invaded, when they had war with Thatcher, that like killed the dictatorship, but it was very violent. But it was like 17, 18, 19 years in Chile, and it was just like in people's daily life, sort of the daily violence, and there wasn't as much history of just constant coups and constant, like it had been kind of a liberal constitutional republic. As far as what they did exactly with the constitution in those years, I don't think they cared in particular. I don't know that much. Like they were like a pretty pariah country, because it's like certainly the US helped install that coup, but then once you have Carter come in 76, there's like they're like starting to be isolated for human rights abuses and all of that, which is partly why like for the 80s, when there's more pressure against them, they want to prepare for like post-dictatorship to still stay in power. So that's why in 73, I think for 7 years, I think the commission that formed the constitution was meeting, the commission.
So Pinochet finally gets booted, and then you have this and then you have this new constitution, but people just felt you just couldn't sort of reform it.
Well,
people want to transform it, basically.
And then what I noticed looking through pieces of it, because we've talked about kind of like how it, obviously puts markets first and makes change difficult, but also the human rights that are codified in there have giant loopholes.
Oh my God.
To where they're pretty much meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, this is a constitution that allowed for like Pinochet to be senator for life for like during the 90s until like the Spanish judge like had him put in the clinic in London. But yeah, all kinds of things like the hyper privatization, sort of procedural things like that. It's just it's like if a neoliberal people in like the creepiest think tank you can imagine just like had the scariest constitution they could think of. Like it's just it's like their baby, like it's wonderful.
And it just seemed like pretty arbitrary ways that you could suddenly have your citizenship revoked, or be tortured or jailed and other forms of repression.
I don't know exactly what all the extrajudicial type things. It's like a constitution. A lot of things are in the legal, in between the lines, right? Like things they create that if you just read it, you wouldn't necessarily notice, but you have to know like the way it was intended to be used, the way it was used, the entire record. And it's a constitution written in those circumstances. I mean, these were far right ideologues, like Jaime Guzman, who's like known as kind of the figure. He was actually assassinated in 91 during the transition to democracy. And he's like a martyr for the right, like there's a giant memorial for him in the business section of town. Like,
yeah. This movement that
he was a right-wing terrorist during Allende. I mean, he was like a street terrorist. Yeah.
The movement that resulted in the, this initiative, that nationwide referendum that passed, isn't that old? How did it happen so quickly?
Let's talk about what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in October, you had, I mean, the initial start was a fare evasion because they had raised like a small amount. They had raised the fare for the metro, and it was initiated by the students. There had been all year a lot of confrontations between students and police. I mean, kind of always a big initiator of political action in Chile is the student movements. I mean, you have the Pingüinos, the Penguins, they call them that because of their uniforms, but like they had first in 2006 under Center Left Bachelet, their first, which was like the first big like political movement since the transition to democracy. And you kind of have like a generation who wasn't as traumatized. You have Pinochet dies in, I think, 2005. I don't remember, but you have that, and then you have another wave in 2011 during Piñera's first presidency. I was here at that time, and it was interesting. Like, it's just amazing. Like the students, they just all take the schools, and they like a lot of pomas and a lot of occupations of the schools. And then, the latest one, there had been like a ley de aula segura, like that they were policing really heavily the campuses. Like in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of feminist organizing around like sexual assault on campuses, and where you have like police like going into bathrooms and all these types of things, yada yada. Always the student movements involved in things for like less policing, more gratuity, more that is more free. And so basically, the students all were evading fares. They were all just running, jumping. After a few days, like they're started to kind of gain momentum, where you have adults training in, you have like we're like taking the metros, and then like Friday of that week there starts to be more of a crackdown. Like you have them throwing tear gas into trains, all of that, and then that night, Friday night, there's just things accelerate, things are burning, like it becomes an uprising and also a serious crackdown. And that night the state of military emergency, I don't know what you call it in English, but the state of emergency is declared by the military, state of martial law. And then what happens after that is then those next weeks, there's a lot of violence, a lot of repression, but also just huge street movements. I mean, it's an uprising, and I think that put a lot of pressure, and some of the deputies, it's a very like grassroots movement. There hasn't been like the traditional organized left as shaping it, but there were deputies who were able to get a deal to calm things down. Not really, but but they did. There was like kind of enough pressure that it was like, we're gonna push through like a deal right now, because it's always been like one of the demands. There's a series of demands always, like whether the pension system or the feminist movement or indigenous or workers, like there's healthcare. There's a lot of like movements, and the Constitution is certainly part of that, because all of those movements depend on the fact that like some people have been even historically anti-voting, because they're like, well, under this Constitution, under this system, this is not fair. So that's always like fundamental to one of the list of demands. And so this was like enough of a strong uprising. I mean, and also just when you have the inescapable fact that it's like clear how far the state has overstepped. Like this is bringing back the worst violence since the dictatorship. This is, people are getting killed. Like there's fires. Like you can't, like if there's enough of that, and then you have millions of people in the streets. I mean, these things can come to a head sometimes, and so then they get that deal. Initially, the plebiscite was going to be in April, so everyone kind of like took off a little bit for the summer. March was like gearing up again, but then with COVID, everything got changed. And so then they just have the plebiscite. I don't know if you have another off on a whole.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, first of all, plebiscite, national vote. Wouldn't that be nice if we had that option in our Constitution? But our supposedly greatest Constitution on the planet doesn't include that provision. But what do you think, Natalie, are any of the takeaways or things that we could learn from, I mean, you being from the U.S., a little bit about our system. What do you think is similar? What can we learn? What's different enough that, wouldn't be replicable here?
I mean, I think always it's like a question of political praxis in terms of like, it's just good to have organized left and not organized left, like you have just a certain amount of pressure that always occurs. You always have these student movements going. You always have, the pension, the old people will be like, my friend's mom's like, this is my march. You have all these movements, and then you also have like your street people who, things go down from time to time, always. Like there's always confrontations. There's always things like this. And so it's like kind of getting in the habit of organizing, I think, around all different things and thinking through what are all the planks you need. And that can be in so many different areas, and just that you don't know when things can explode, and you go with the moment and try to see what you can get. It's just an attitude of politics, I think.
I mean, it really seems like, because we have just innumerable converging crises right now, right? And different things are hitting different people more acutely, but everyone's being, impacted. And something like a new constitution seems like, that's the kind of thing that everybody can bring everybody to the table, which I think we've, had a lot of, things. Right now, our movements are not really doing that yet. So we're trying, we want to coalesce into a larger set of demands that represents everything that's going on. But we do, Greg mentioned earlier, there was also fare hikes in New York City that kind of had a little buzz for a moment. But we have, this uprising against police violence that has been sustained. It's not being, it's being concealed. I think the how large and sustained it continues to be. I don't think people are fully aware anymore. I think they're trying to get people to forget about that. But yeah, I mean, anyway, I don't know. I think have a question.
No, I think I forgot to answer a difference. I think difference is sort of the stakes of what you guys are working on, like the politicization of the Constitution. And I think, whatever set of historical circumstances, or, it's an old Constitution in the US, whereas and so it sort of takes on over the years more and more a charity, more and more a sense of this fetishness.
Reverence, incredible reverence.
Yeah. Whereas in Latin America, a lot of these constitutions are newer too, right? I mean, and sometimes the violence is very naked, right? I mean, the vote in for the Pinochet Constitution was not democratic at all. A lot of secret agents voted, double votes, and people know that it's not a democratic constitution. It's clear. It's in historical memory, and so that changes the politicization shape, I think, in different ways. And that's something to learn from, to say, the US is 100% not disconnected from the region. Of course, it's the hegemon. I saw some of the comments, yeah, of course, the right-wing stooges were trying to foment right-wing coups everywhere. That was that's been their thing since forever. There's no doubt that the US is the aggressor hegemon. And so also learning from that in a humble way, that this other side of that imperialism in Latin America has agency, and to see the ways that they in recent history have exercised their agency over their political process, and to humbly be we can take from that,
Yeah, it just seems to me that, it's just that awareness isn't still quite, it's growing, just still isn't quite reached the tipping point where people feel that the particular individual they have, at a time problems can't be solved by just getting a better person, in office, or just a better law, or let's write a, regulation, or just some decree, that there isn't something that's just fundamentally wrong and fixed and unjust. It's gaining in awareness, but just not quite there yet. To connect these things, everybody is here, and they're not like this. Sort of saying whatever your issue is, there's something similar that connects them all together. It's not an issue constitution, it's a strategy that's horizontal, and that by horizontal, it connects to all these problems that we individually are experiencing one at a time, and we're stuck in this one at a time thing, this one at a time trap that somehow, we just can't connect with other people strategic wise, because we're all sort of stuck in our one at a time issue, but it seems to be changing a little bit.
Right. Well, that's abolitionism too, right? Like that you're creative destruction all the time at all nodes, and you have to think like in terms of the overarching matrix of knowledge.
Shelly, is this a good opportunity to connect to talk about how at least a few people over the past weekend tried to make some of these larger connections right here in the good old US of A?
Oh, yeah. So some of you may have been there with us, but we had our first, we've done what we call people movement assemblies. It's a process that we borrowed. And we've been doing these at our national conferences every year. But that has been restricted to people who are hardcore move to amenders and who can afford to travel to Washington, D.C. and do this with us. So COVID gave us this opportunity in a moment where it feels like the conversation is more relevant than it's been in years past to, do a national people's movement assembly virtually. And so we did that. And the way that it was called Toward a New Constitution. And so, we just had great speakers and great panelists. And then we did breakouts. So the first breakout, we just kind of defined the moment and identified threats and opportunities. And then the second breakout was very juicy and exciting, where, people were given permission to be visionary and fearless in what a people's constitution could look like. And we had, I think, we never went under triple digits, and I think we were pretty much stayed between 110 and 130 participants. It was a 2-day thing, and everybody pretty much came back the next day. So
amazing.
I know. I thought we would lose like half the people, and everyone came back. So I think it was really powerful, and I think people are ready to think big like this. And so some of the things that we some of the themes that came up across all the breakouts, because there was like, I think 10 or 12 breakouts, and there were, a lot of recurring themes. So we collectively identified that we're in a moment of converging crises: climate collapse, global uprisings against state violence and police brutality, and a global pandemic when most are without access to healthcare. And of course, a lot of this is US centric. What's happening now is rooted in the values defined in or missing from the U.S. Constitution, which is or an undemocratic and ultra-powerful judicial branch, which that's become even more real over this past week, a lack of human rights protections, no right to vote, and a whole lot of racist language, just to name a few. We agreed that bold systemic change is needed. We have to know our power and be able to think outside of what we've been told is possible. It's going to take courage, audacity, and a whole lot of learning and conversations to make it happen, but the only thing we have to lose is our chance. We have to have a vision and a plan. We learned that when constitutions around the world are reimagined, and on average, countries rewrite their constitutions every 19 years, which is, very different than ours. They're more democratic, and when the movement has a clear vision of what they want in their constitution, and we've been building this vision for over 10 years, and we continued it this weekend. And I will say, most people know us, and we are a constitutional amendment campaign, but we've always talked about any way that we can democratize the Constitution, we are open to. This was just, the strategy that made the most sense at the time, and it might continue to make the most sense. But we're open to any ways and avenues to make our Constitution more democratic. And people want a Constitution that protects human rights, not just property rights. We like a lot of what's in the Bill of Rights, with some changes and exceptions, but the rights should extend much further. People want a right to healthcare, housing, rights of nature, gender equity, a right to vote, and a whole lot more. And we don't have to start from scratch. We can get over American exceptionalism and take inspiration from the constitutions of other countries, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and the Second Bill of Rights proposed by FDR. So those were kind of the highlights and takeaways from that weekend.
Great. And just like in Chile,
yeah, I mean, sorry, what was the question?
no, I was just saying, just like in Chile, you know, this is as much a process as it is trying to come up with a final product. And at least right now, that democratic process is what's so important. And getting over that psychological hump that, oh my gosh, this is something that we aren't capable or should be permitted to do. Just get beyond that.
Mhm.
And, you know, that had to be a hurdle that people, you know, Chile had to get over as well. We have a right to decide.
Yeah.
For sure. There's like a retaking of political agency. It's like the riots kind of give you permission in a way. And there's like kind of a reclaiming of old political traditions in that way. Like since the uprisings, you had like cabildos, like local people meeting. You had like different sort of things you had even leading up to the plebiscite. I had friends who like did like Zoom chats about it, and going up to the April, there's going to be people are going to be talking about it all the time. Like it's going to be on all the political media. There's going to be who knows what, like every last group is going to be having meetings for like the next, you know, just all that stuff. They're going to embrace the, it is fun too when you have like a very centralized big city. So there's like a certain critical mass of organizing, but people are going to have fun with it, you know?
Yeah. And we've certainly had fun with our constitutional proposed amendment to where, you know, in calling for ending corporate constitutional rights and money is speech, it doesn't take that much studying to become more aware and be able to run, so to speak, you know, intellectual figure eights even around our public officials, most of whom are clueless when it comes to corporate constitutional rights. So it's not something that, you know, truly is quote unquote rocket science. We can figure this out, and we have figured it out. We already have a history of figuring it out on a piece of what needs to happen. Why the heck not figure it out on all the rest? And we're not giving up this, certainly not. Are We the People Amendment? We're still pushing it, and we're going to push hard, but we're going to push it within a context that's wider and deeper.
Yep.
So, all right. So what else is in the news this week that we want to try to make some sense of? Shelly, you want to say something about the whole refugee issue?
Sure. So I'm not sure what Trump's strategy is here, but you know he's doing a lot of pretty horrific things in these last few days before the election, in terms of actions and words regarding refugees, many of whom are refugees because of U.S. policy. But the Trump administration had reserved 4,000 slots for Iraqi refugees who had helped American troops, contractors, or news media, or who are members of a persecuted minority group in the fiscal year that ended September 30th. And then it ultimately only admitted 161 Iraqis, or 4%, to the United States, the lowest percentage of the four categories of refugees the administration authorized for resettlement last year, which is obviously, you know, I mean, for him being the, you know, trying to take the anti-war lane, you know, it's pretty incongruent with, you know, the treatment of the victims of our foreign policy. And then yesterday he tweeted something that, you know, he said, "My administration has suspended the entry of refugees from terror-compromised nations such as Syria, Somalia, and Yemen. Biden's plan surges refugees 700% into Minnesota, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are swing states, burdening schools and hospitals while opening the floodgates to radical Islamic terror."
Could he get any more dog whistles in that statement? I don't know. I mean, he just sort of threw in all the stereotypes you could possibly conceive of and played on the nativist and racist and anti-immigration, and feeds on, you know, another story that came out this week of the House of Representatives issued a scathing report on Trump migrant family separation policy, in which the House said that the Trump administration knew it would not be able to reunite refugees and other migrant families as it ripped children, including infants, from the arms of their parents, but did so anyway, intentionally, as sort of a chilling effect to deter people, I guess. That was the quote unquote logic behind it. But of course, playing to the base, it's just beyond sickening and disgusting, but, is consistent, is it not, with 4 years worth almost of policy toward incoming migrants, many of whom, in fact, almost all of whom come to the U.S. seeking asylum because they are escaping, and by law, they're war-torn or violent places in places like Central and some countries of South America. So I don't know, from your perspective, Natalie, from people leaving Central and South America, people don't want to leave their homes unless they feel like oftentimes they have no choice.
Sure. I mean, that's imagine like with Haitian migration, which is an issue as far as like one of the biggest groups that's getting oppressed in the US. And then also, since the 2010 earthquake in Haiti was like region wide, where you have, they went like country to country, having like through South America too, where, you had during the commodities boom where Ecuador had open borders, or there during the commodities boom, they were in Brazil. And then once those cycles ended, they're getting kicked out. So, Chile as well has, like in the uprisings, you have migrants who are killed, and there's all these layers of race and history of oppression. Yeah, I mean, the history somewhere like Haiti, of course, is just like an assault, right? And all these places, yeah, like Salvador, you have, a place we talked about with that they're working with their constitution, a lot of interesting things. And yeah, that was like a war in the 80s initiated by the US that like initiated that migration wave, and then also deportation waves that are like deporting people who grew up in the US back to El Salvador, which is like what ends up like, and then they don't know anybody there, and that ends up like, and like LA gangs are deported to El Salvador, and like we don't even realize like the whole cycle is just like a US cycle, right? And that you can analogize out to all these places. It's all of a piece, right?
Yeah. And then I think too that I think it's important for people to understand, no matter how you vote next week, a lot of the reasons that we have so many refugees are directly related to Joe Biden's political career. And so, for those who are, voting against Trump, it's really important to not go to sleep after this, because, I actually last night watched Joe Biden's speech on the Senate floor when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and his job was basically to sell the Iraq War, which I believe he knew was based on lies, to fellow Democrats. And so a lot of the things that we're seeing happening in Central and South America, a Biden administration could potentially have more interest than the Trump administration, and more competence than the Trump administration in interfering with these popular uprisings. And so, international solidarity is extremely important right now, and keeping an eye on whoever, wins, because they, neither of them really care. Although it sounds like Biden is going to accept more refugees. That's great, I guess. But at the end of the day, he's still part of the fundamental problem of why they are coming here. So
I gotta plug my good friend's book, Daniel Denver, All American Nativism, shows really well like 70s, 80s, 90s, like the different eras of Democratic and Republican hegemony as far as immigration and with the border in Latin America and all of that. It's a very detailed history. And yeah, I mean, it's Biden's, of course, complicit in all those eras.
Right.
He's been around. Yeah.
Actively, has been enthusiastically cheering on all of this intervention, coups, wars, etc. And so, so this is an area where Republicans and Democrats tend to get along fine. Like, there's really no conflict between the two parties when it comes
Yeah, so the takeaway is, whoever's elected, we have just got to be vigilant. There's just no question about it. We can't rely or depend on whoever we think may be the better candidate doing things correctly or justly for us. Those days, if they ever existed, which I believe never did, but to whatever extent they were better than they are, that's no sort of excuse and no crutch or cane or anything else to lean on in exchange for us being active and organized and strategic in acting in solidarity both here and with people, our brothers and sisters abroad.
Millie says, don't forget Colin Powell's endorsement of Biden at the DNC. Yeah.
Yes, right. Colin. Good old Colin.
So many people I would
love
like to say hi to who have been commenting, but hi to everybody we haven't had a chance to say hi to.
Right. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Well, maybe we should move on. Just wanted to say something. There was a piece that came out this week about NPR, and apparently their annual report just came out showing, as it has increasingly done so every year, their connection to corporate funders, and not just sort of in general, but some horrific ones. If you flip through their list of corporate underwriters, they list criminals and other major recidivists who are violating the law in multiple ways, from ExxonMobil, that pleaded guilty to Exxon Valdez oil spills, lumber liquidators, pleaded guilty, plea deal, environmental crimes, Panasonic, Tyson Foods, Raymond James, the whole variety of companies that have been exposed and had also settled under False Claims Act and other charges of major law violations with multi-million-dollar settlements. NPR has been quiet in responding to efforts to comment on this. And I think why it's important to bring this up is just, for a couple of reasons. One is, it's important to understand, particularly these days when the media is being so lame-basted, as being not objective, neutral, fake, and all the rest. Some, obviously, sources are better than others, and relatively speaking, NPR has been better than, the quote-unquote overtly corporate press, but let's not kid ourselves that they are part, in their own way, of being part of the corporate press, with more and more them receiving corporate underwriting. And no organization, obviously, whether it's a media corporation, a nonprofit, a political, an individual running for office, whoever or whatever the case may be, is objective and neutral if they receive large sums of money from any entity, be it from a super duper wealthy person, millionaire, billionaire, foundation, government, corporation, political parties. You're beholden. I mean, it's just natural that you are going to listen to someone who is giving you, a boatload of money. And so it's extremely important that when we are trying to gauge the independence and the objectivity and credibility and legitimacy, that we understand, to what extent that entity is beholden to a very few number and not to, a large number, sort of at the grassroots, whether it is in the case of NPR, a media entity, or whether it is in case of an organization that is supposedly speaking on behalf of the grassroots that may actually be taking money from a few number of very well-to-do entities, or again, big foundations or corporations or foundations and the like. And so, all to say that is why intentionally and deliberately Move to Amend has basically from day one understood and recognizes and reinforces the sense that we have to be both, because they're inextricably connected, financially, economically, and politically independent. And that means we don't, take money from all those aforementioned entities, but instead rely on you, people at the grassroots, because that's who we are dependent to. That's who we ultimately are accountable and responsible to, and that's what we want to be. That's who we want to be accountable to and responsible to. People who are on the front lines, people who feel that something is wrong and amiss, and we don't want to have strings attached. Because when you do, then you censor yourself. I mean, it's one thing to be censored by others, but when you have to censor yourself, that is then, an issue of integrity and authenticity. and something that obviously is preventing you from doing what's needing to be done. So anyway, it just seemed to be an important issue to bring up for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah, and we'll plug it again at the end, but if you would like to join the folks who keep us going and support our work, we are sustained on small donations, and I think our average donation is $40. And even with the CARES Act, which a lot of nonprofits received relief, because we're a 501c4, which is technically a dark money vehicle, although we don't use it in that way, but that allows us to advocate directly for the We the People amendment, so we have to use that. We were exempt. We were not eligible for CARES relief funding, which, in the grand scheme, 501c4s probably shouldn't be getting relief, but ours kind of didn't need it. So if you are somebody who hasn't been hard hit and are able, and we've had some people who had to step down from giving because of, the impending depression. So, if you want to fill someone's shoes who can't give right now, we really encourage you to go to movetoamend.org/donate and help us keep this grassroots organization healthy.
Yep. And, just sort of one thing we're really trying to push is people, if they can, to become a sustainer, even if it's $5 a month. Hey, $5. What is that? Like one, I don't know, pumpkin spice turkey gravy latte. Okay. For the next week. I mean, you can just sacrifice one of those, which has got to be $5, and multiply that by 12, and that's where you could donate $5 a month. So help us out if you can. movetoamend.org/donate. All right, want to talk about not George, but Walter.
And a segue that just popped into my head on this is that, I sometimes do stuff on our Move to Amend Twitter account. And, one of the freedoms that we have is to take the right position on things without, large funders saying, oh, you're getting too radical for us, or, this is, so we don't have to deal with any of that. And it's really nice. And so this Walter Wallace, many of you are aware of this latest police murder of a person having a mental health crisis. And that kind of got drowned out by the Walmart looting. And so I, being a very on Twitter person, just noticed a lot of horror, not just from the right, but from the center about, looting a Walmart and how that is somehow just as bad or worse as, these routine extrajudicial killings of people and largely Black men. So I was able to make a post. I actually retweeted myself on Move to Amend, but I was just talking about, if we're really going to talk about Walmart and how, we can connect this to corporate constitutional rights, because the reason that Walmart is allowed to just go into any town or city that they choose and erect a giant new building and crush the local economy and put people, put small businesses out and hire people at poverty wages is because as people, as corporate persons, they have their 14th Amendment right to equal protection. And that right was originally meant for newly freed Black men. So there's just so much horrific irony in this. But, a community has no choice in a Walmart coming in and setting up shop. There's literally nothing that they can do about it because of the corporate constitutional rights. And if they organize and try to fight it or pass regulations to limit what they're doing, then they can be sued by the corporation for, Fifth Amendment, like future profits lost, which is supposed to be for like an individual person's livelihood. But Walmart, can sue you for millions of dollars for whatever profit they believe they would lose if they were limited or prevented from doing what they wanted to do. So I just feel like that puts a whole different spin on, is it bad to loot a Walmart? I don't know. I don't think it is, personally. And then
Walmart got looted in Chile. I mean, and there had been strikes earlier that year in 2019 where a bunch of people got laid off for striking. So it's like, yeah, cool, loot Walmart. That's cool. It's not Walmart. It's called Leader, but it's owned by Walmart. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, so they're doing this globally. They are, everyone that works at Walmart here in the United States has to be on food stamps, and then they have to use their food stamps to buy their food at Walmart. And it's just a really disgusting, horrific system, and it destroys communities. It destroys local economies. And so when we see, the desperation on top of the police, and the police are going to protect that Walmart over the people every single time. There was enough critical mass for them to go in and just take over that Walmart that day. But usually you're going to get killed if you do that. So,
or they loot the Walmart themselves. And
right.
That's a different.
We've seen generations, have we not, of U.S.-backed, dictators that have been set up in countries for the almost sole exclusive purpose to either open up their economy to having resources plundered, or open up their consumer base to have, U.S. multinationals come in and displace locally owned indigenous businesses and economies. So that has, it's not the Fifth Amendment or the 14th Amendment that's used to sort of take down businesses in the U.S. I mean, that's the vehicles, but overseas, it's the gun or the tank or the battleship.
Or the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery, I think, kind of gives permission for this, right? Like that, it's always been used in that way.
And we're all legally mediated by all these different shape of agreements, right? And like Chile and a lot of these places are actually in the TPP now, right? And you have all these. Everyone's mediated by constitutions and legal agreements, and it's like untangling the allocation of coordination rights that is unjust, to use a Sanjukta Pal phrase.
And Chile is part of the TPP now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which the U.S. was kind of,
Right.
And it's those trade deals again.
Enthusiastically, parts of the people, not everybody. Obviously, the left no, but
and those trade deals.
Peru, all those Chile, Peru. Peru is also relatively conservative.
Part of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have that whole history with. I don't know if that's a tangent, but and then I don't know who else, to be honest. People in Asia.
Right.
Sure, who else in Latin America is in the TPP? I don't know if Ecuador is in it or not. Probably not.
Some have said some of those international trade deals are, in a sense, an extension of the United States Commerce Clause that sort of forces economies open. That's really not about trade, be it free or fair. It's about corporate rule and the establishment of these international trade tribunals that set up these kangaroo courts that you have corporate attorneys ruling that oftentimes those negotiations are held in secret, that you cannot then challenge. It's set up that way. So what is Walmart doing in local communities? The same sort of phenomena is happening overseas, and so I'm sure you've felt it, or people, they're parts of Central.
We're all in the same webs of relation,
Right. Well, maybe the last story we wanted to kind of share is, since it is election season coming up on Tuesday, to just share some numbers have come our way of, the amount of money that's being thrown around. Certainly part of the We the People Amendment is to abolish this bizarre doctrine that political money in elections is equivalent to First Amendment protected free speech. No, money's not speech, it's property, because if it's speech, then obviously those who have the most money have the most speech, and it drowns out the voice of people without money. Well, there's a whole lot of speechifying going on in terms of big money being thrown around right now across the board. But a lot of it is going to Biden and to the Democrats. So it's going to the presidential level, it's going to the Senate level, it's going to the House level, and the amount is just stunning. And where it's coming from, yeah, to some extent, we're seeing an expansion of money coming from little people, the $200 through the internet, and I guess you can say that's a good thing. But a whole lot of it is coming from the big entities, big wealthy individuals and corporations. Biden himself has raised $810 million so far. Just his campaign alone, when you throw in his supporting organizations, it's up to $1.1 billion compared to Trump's mere $800 million. And many of these entities who are sponsoring him, individuals, are from Silicon Valley, Hollywood, top finance, like the fire industry, finance, insurance, and real estate. Firms like Blackstone, Bain Capital, Pincus. You've got Bloomberg tipping in with a cool $100 million. A few other people connected to Google, Facebook, and the like. And so the whole rhetoric of Trump saying that Biden is a socialist and communist is laughable when you see the Wall Street and the other big tycoons banking him. And, what's interesting about, I guess, the takeaways from the money that's coming to him is that, they fear, the powers to be, that, my God, a second term of Trump might actually unleash an uncontrollable social and political explosion in the country. So we can't have that. We have to have some kind of control. But the second is, hey, we see this parade coming, and so we better get the hell out in front of it. Same that they did with Obama, did they not? The money went from McCain to Obama when they saw, they put their finger to the wind and saw he was going to win. So they ran and supported him so that they could get a seat at the table, more than a seat at the table, so they could start controlling and ruling. And that's basically what they did through all those bankers and banksters becoming part of his inner elite circle of economic advisors and all the rest. So that's, at the presidential level, but it's no less true at the Senate and House level, with boatloads of money going to senators that either have military backgrounds, 4 main senators, Kelly in Arizona, McGrath in Kentucky, and a couple of others, or are corporatists, if you will. Jamie Harrison, a corporate lobbyist, and the person running against Ernst in Iowa is a multi-million-dollar businesswoman, and others. So you're seeing those big dollars line up to them. And in the House, it's sort of the same. A lot of people are being bankrolled who are either business persons or part of what has been affectionately called the CIA Democrats, 11 of whom already exist, another half dozen who are former military people who, running against Republicans in more quote unquote conservative districts, are in line to come into the House. And if so, they could form their own caucus. Never mind sort of the existing progressive caucus. You could have the right-wing Democratic progressive, well, not progressive, but right-wing, CIA caucus Democrats that, will be for imperialism and big business overseas, that we have to be mindful of. Yeah, some people might think are better than the Republicans, but let's not kid ourselves as to maybe what their alternative agenda or ulterior agenda may be. And so hopefully the Dems are at least a bit more able to be influenced. If we are out there creating a lot of havoc, that's going to be our responsibility, to create that havoc and point it toward the Dems.
Mm-hmm. And we'll finally be allowed to do that after November 3rd, hopefully. Right now, you can't say anything or you're helping Trump.
Right.
Yeah. Also,
Well,
I want to lift up, who was it? It was, J.D. Roybal. I hope I'm saying your name right. Shared Sierra Club between 2007 and 2010. The Sierra Club accepted over $25 million in donations from the gas industry. And I think they were the first ones to come out and endorse Biden and try to lend legitimacy to his not so great climate plan. So anyway.
Boy, far afield from about, 2 decades ago when the Sierra Club had an actual corporate accountability or responsibility subcommittee that was working pretty active, and some moved to amenders like Jim Price down in Alabama, and others were part of that and working at trying to, within the Sierra Club, connect issues of environmental, destruction with corporate rule. And, that basically got defunded and delegitimized, sadly. Well, good news. What have we run into over the past week that we think is pretty cool? Anything?
I think we've talked about the objectively awesome stuff, which we don't always get to do. That we don't always get to go hard on like stuff we're really excited about on this show. So we're usually like, after all this depressing stuff, let's talk about something positive.
Yeah. I ran into something over the week. It was in New York Magazine called "The Birth of an Extraordinary Modern Progressive Movement" that just chronicles. It's easy to forget. God, there's been so much horror, right? That we've been so much responding, reacting, resisting to. But there's been some pretty amazing stuff that's happened. No, it's not sort of had staying power, and it's been kind of oftentimes focused individually. But everything from like the day after the inauguration, the Women's March, to the Muslim ban airport protests, to the Texas abortion protests where the activists were dressed up as characters from The Handmaid's Tale, to the climate march on Washington in 2017, the March for Our Lives in March of 2018, the wall protests, supporters and detractors of Trump's immigration policies protested on both sides of the border wall, to the family separation protests in 2018, the Kavanaugh hearings protest, the Me Too movement in reaction to Harvey Weinstein and others, the midterm elections that was the sort of response to the Me Too, or part of carrying on the Me Too movement, the youth climate strike in September 19, the Poor People's Campaign, the uprising related to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor assassinations, Black Lives and All Lives Matter, the movement including for trans lives, and the Wall of Moms. And, all of this has taken place within just the last couple of years. Hopefully it is just the beginning. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for that.
Just to remind ourselves.
And now we get to, watch as Chile works towards their constitutional convention and pay attention to that process and learn from it. We've never, the last one we had here was the first one. So it's still very unclear what it would look like, what the rules would be, but we have places to to look to and be able to more clearly imagine what that could look like here. So it's very exciting. Thank you, Natalie, so much for joining us.
Oh, yep. Thanks for having me.
So just as we kind of close out, there's a few try to highlight at the end of announcements, one of which, hey, pretty exciting today, a little later in a couple of hours. What's happening?
We are going to have what's it called? Well, it's like a movie night. It's a spooky
Fright Night.
Fright Night. Corporate rule. Sorry, I should have had it up. Corporate
racism, corporate power, and other horrors.
And we're going to show They Live, which I haven't seen before, and I know that that's supposed to be, a pretty, definitely a commentary on capitalism and race is my understanding. So I'm really excited to watch that and be able to discuss it. And so you're all invited to that. What time does that start?
6 p.m. That is Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So, yeah.
Eastern.
Get your no-dos out if you're on the East Coast.
So that's super.
And it has, They Live. I mean, yeah, it has it. But it also has one of the most unbelievable fight scenes between two people that you will ever see. I mean, epic. So just get ready for that. One-on-one, mano and mano. Unbelievable.
I've never seen you excited about a fight before. So
well, no, I mean it's just the duration of it, it's just gripping. So anyway.
All right. If it's a fight Greg's into, then I'm into it. All right. And then ways to support Move to Amend in the long term. Definitely join us tonight if you can. But you can also sign the petition if you haven't. I don't want to go too deep into why the petition is important, but I really encourage anyone who hasn't to do so for a few reasons. One, we can keep in touch with you. We've been recently experiencing some censorship on social media, so this would allow us to be able to always directly contact our supporters. And then it's also a really important tool to demonstrate our numbers. And that can be on the national level, which we're getting pretty close to 500,000. I think we're like at 480,000. 500,000 would be a nice number to be able to say we are. And also when we're doing lobbying for co-sponsors for the We the People Amendment in Congress, being able to say to a person that we're lobbying and showing them how many people in their district, their constituents, support this is really important, really powerful, and it has led to, I don't know how many of our event, sometimes it'll take 4 or 5 times of meeting with people, but that's usually a pretty powerful thing to kind of lock them in. So if you want your Congress people to know that you want them to support the We the People Amendment, signing the petition is the best way to do that. And then we'll also calling them and letting them know. But donate. We talked about this earlier. We talked about our political independence and how we will never sell out. We will fizzle out before we ever sell out. But we really do need, folks to step up and give what they can, whether that's $5 a month, $28 a month for the 28th Amendment, or a one-time donation if you're not sure about your financial future, although the recurring donations help us to budget and plan.
And right, again, that's so important is, let's be real, let's be honest, let's be, I think, understanding of the condition that we're in, the scale, the magnitude of the crisis we're facing will only be solved by an equally dynamic in terms of scale and magnitude of solution. And if you are tethered, if you are connected, if you are beholden, we'll never reach that degree of scale of what's needed and called for. That's why we must be both politically and economically independent.
And then finally, our movement education program. I don't know if Jessica is watching or listening, but kudos to her for, putting this together in its current iteration. So this is our 3rd iteration of, so I thought it was housed on the Radical Guide site. It's showing movetomend.org/education3. I guess both would work, but I know that our modules are housed on the a Radical Guide website as well. And it kind of helps people get grounded in our theory of change and our philosophy around what we want to do, why we need a movement, studying past movements and what went well and what didn't, and what we can learn from them, and also anti-oppression principles and ways to make local organizing more democratic, and also how to organize in solidarity with people on the front lines of struggle against corporate rule in their community.
Right. So it's been great. I just have one concluding thing. I ran into this quote the other day. It's by a British novelist and critic named Margaret Drabble. She said, when nothing is sure, and boy, doesn't that describe these days. Everything is so uncertain. When nothing is sure, everything is possible.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to us to make it possible.
Mm-hmm. Yay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for being here and engaging in this discussion with us.
All
right.
Yes,
all right. Well,
great.
We'll review tonight, and then next Friday we'll be here. It'll be a different crew, but I'm
hopefully
sure
we'll be here.
Hopefully
Yes, hopefully we'll be here. They will.
Probably some mostly election synthesis analysis. So join us.
Yep. Be well. Take care. Thanks for joining.
All right. Bye.